The tug of war over baby Jessica may finally be over.
The people who raised her now lose her and are devastated.
But in our minds, Jessie will always be our daughter.
The legal question, who has the real right to a child? Those who gave her life or those who have been part of her life?
Part of what's interesting to me about what happens with this exposure is you get the sense that people, regular people, when they look at this case, are outraged and have a very strong sense that family means something really different from what the law is saying it means.
Well, but do they know why they're outraged? Or is it just an inchoate emotionalism? Oh, this poor little girl. Do they know really why they should be outraged and what they're being outraged about? Because, I mean, we portray ourselves as this child-loving society, and, you know, kids are so wonderful and everything, but we treat them like property in the courts. And once you say, well, you're property, you belong in some way to your parents, you start thinking of them as property, and that means you can throw them away, you can bend them, fold them, spindle them, mutilate them, put them on the cover of magazines to sell magazines, do anything you want with them, because they have no voice, no representation in court. And we treat them like garbage. Are we such really a child-loving
Also,
society?
there's this way in which it's easy for everybody, media and individuals, to focus on poor Jessica and forget the fact that, as you say, in general, we're treating children like this. In general, if you look at kids in the welfare system, they're being yanked around, they're being held for 3 years, they're being shifted after 3 years with nobody thinking about it or giving them any sympathy.
Yeah, do we ever ask? I mean, it's like a plague of child abuse in recent years. Suddenly, maybe it was underreported now, but there does seem to be more children beaten, more children showing up dead in hospitals, and that it conflicts with our image of ourselves as this child-centric community. Maybe it's time to ask, well, why on the one hand do we have all this brutality and abuse, and on the other hand have this myth, sentimental myth about the way we are with children? And I think the root of it may be the courts and the law and the way children are not represented.
And the appalling thing is what we were talking about before, is that the person who was to be the child advocate in the legal system is not valued any more than the child is.
It has no legal status.
Has no legal status to say, to bring, and here we go, you know, the age-old problem of trying to integrate psychology and the law. I don't mean to be an expert on that, but it seems to me that this comes up again and again, so that the real issue for this child is that she will be removed because she's gotten so old now. She's going to be removed at one of the most sensitive times in a child's life, a time when she's completely attached, in the old sense of the word, to her parents. And that is because there were so many appeals allowed so early on in this.
Well, what if she had had, and if all kids had, a rough, tough lawyer standing behind them? If every adult knew, you mess with a child, there's going to be some big, scary lawyer climbing up your back.
Well, the Commonwealth does that for children at risk. And they do it for children at risk, they do it for children in care and protection. You do have a lawyer, you do have an advocate. this child
Appointed
clearly
by
didn't have that. Appointed by the court, and the judge, the advocate has as much to say as both parents' attorneys, at least in the Commonwealth.
The advocate doesn't do you that much good, though, unless you have some substantive rights. And in fact, Jessica had an advocate. They filed a case. The Michigan Supreme Court ended up deciding she had no standing whatsoever to have her interests heard. So part of the problem here, I mean, part of what's interesting here is that the court has been so honest and said, we aren't going to count Jessica's interests at all. We will not look at the issue of best interest. In fact, when we look at it, we recognize she should stay with the DeBoers. She's going to go back because we will assume her interests are somehow equated with the birth parents. So
But you
what
don't
I
get
think
back
we have
to
to change
Susan's
is that.
point. Right. I mean, we can have a best interest standard written into the law. We can have advocates appointed for children. But until there are time frames, and until we can all agree, getting the psychology and the law together, that there are absolute deadlines for making these decisions, and that children are entitled to stability, and they're entitled to continuity, and you've got to make a decision, Your Honor. Until we can get those kinds of time frames really firmly in place, I'm not sure that even changing the standard and having attorneys appointed makes a lot of sense. You still have thousands of children languishing in the system without any.
Well, you do have a
final
court
decision
system
making.
that's overburdened and
Well,
overworked,
yes.
and by the time
At
the
least
children
then they're
get,
treated like everybody else.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I mean, even if they get caught in the court for years,
Their voice
at
will be
least,
heard.
and at least they're treated like everybody else who's caught in the courts for years.
But I think given this, one of the horrible things about this case is that the adults, the 4 adults involved in this case,
Adults in quotes.
I think have lost sight of this child, because who is saying to them, you know, you must all hurry up, you must all make a decision in the best interest of this child. Not because you've taken this on, now you're going to fight until the death of it. And I think that there's no right and wrong in terms of making judgments about either of these sets of parents.
Well, again, I don't want to harp on this, but isn't the reason that they're fighting like this and that they're giving no quarter because they're regarding this child as property?
Yes,
That's
no, I
what you
agree
fight
with
over
you.
Well,
is what
but
you
any more
own.
than we would, I mean, wouldn't it be hard for any of us to say, I'm going to surrender my child because someone is saying that, you know, they want her or they think that somebody else will be a better parent? I mean, I have trouble
Well-
faulting the 4 parents. My sense is that it's the courts saying biology is all, particularly at this point of time. The court's looking at a
I think you
2.5-year-old who's
can.
been parented for 2.5 years by one set of parents and saying the only thing we'll think about is Dan Schmidt's parental rights. That seems to me the problem. I don't really feel
Well,
I can blame the DeBoers for saying we want to hold on to this child. We think it's best for her. We think it makes sense
No,
for her.
perhaps not that, but the fact that these 4 supposed adults have not been able to meet and talk and discuss and try to work out something in the best interest of the child, I can fault them for that, for their intractability.
What do you think it
But-
should work out?
I don't know, maybe some cooperative parenting thing, or maybe the Schmidts, I think that's the Schmidts, would be able to say after 2.5 years, well, we love this child, but we know how destructive it would be to remove her from the only family she's ever known at this age, change her name, and introduce her to 2 total strangers, say, well, these are your parents now.
But
I
that's-
mean, if they truly loved this child, and if it wasn't a matter of their possessing of the child, perhaps they would do that.
They need to get together. They need to quit this fighting. It still feels to me like a nasty divorce. Neither of these couples will budge.
Arguing over the stereo.
Larry,
Well,
what do you know, because you deal with these cases, right? I mean, what do you think will happen, what kind of harm do you see to a child in this situation?
In this case, I see gross harm to this child. I mean, there's no coming back. As I said earlier, I think this is the Dred Scott for children. Just this is property, and she doesn't belong to the people who've taken care of her. She belongs to the people for whom the egg and sperm united. And there's something wrong with that. And I think the other thing is that there is something that we really don't want to talk about, is that maybe we don't want to admit that there are some people who can't parent. And we prefer not to think that. Once a woman has a child, she can mother it. Judges say it to me all the time. She's the mother, she can mother it. Well, 3 months later, we're back in court and we have a dead kid, or we have a child being burned, or whatever. So that it seems to me that we don't want to talk about that. The children do get abused, they get killed. But we prefer to say, oh, mothers can mother, just give them a little help.
Well, that's, yeah, part of my concern is that this case has to do with a privileging of biology that I
That's
think
right.
comes up in child abuse cases, and my own sense is that we're too reluctant as a society to say at certain points birth parents have surrendered their rights by virtue of their behavior, and that we've
Or
got to
by-
terminate rights. And I think a lot of why we have so many kids sitting in foster care is we're not willing to cut that
Yeah.
bond.
Judges don't want to do that. One of the things you have when you go, especially when you go up to the Court of Appeals, the last time I was up there, one of the judges talked to the families, and it turned out the families were perfectly willing to stop fighting the surrender as long as it wasn't on the books that they were abusive parents.
Why, were they planning to do it again?
No, but they were willing to surrender the child as long as it wasn't on the record that they were unfit parents. I mean, so you
And
have
wanted
what's the
a no
problem with the
fault
judges? I mean, weren't the
surrender.
judges willing to allow?
once the judge said yes, if you surrender, we won't say you're unfit parents. They said okay.
And how long did that case take to get to that point?
It was 2.5 years.
Two and
Just
a
like
half
this.
years in
Yeah,
a child's
see, here
life.
you go again.
Yeah, 2.5 years.
But one of the things the law does is focus on fault. I mean,
Yes.
I think too much. I mean, the reason apparently that the Iowa courts didn't terminate Dan Schmidt's rights is they couldn't find him at fault. They found him innocent. He came forward, he hadn't been told, it was the birth mother who lied. So they say he's innocent. If we can't find him at fault, we have to give him his child.
Although an objective look at this guy's parenting background certainly does not mark him as an exemplary parent, right?
Well, he's abandoned
Right.
too.
He's
Right.
abandoned 2 children, deadbeat dad, and accused of abusing at least one of the wives.
Well, but the other thing is you can't.
And for the court to say,
you
yeah,
can't
he's
totally
going to be the
deny
dad.
biology
Yeah,
either.
you can't.
And you know there is a kind of linking or linkage. I don't know if it's the right word, but even as you know, Larry, kids who are beaten and taken away by the courts will go back to that parent,
Absolutely.
and it's
But
not
that has
because
nothing
they
to do
want
with
get.
biology.
Well,
It's the only parent they know.
That has
It's the-
yeah.
well, I
That's
know.
psychological.
I don't think that has anything to do with biology.
Well, if you look at it, that's the person who gave birth to you and was bringing you up, yes.
Well, that's the person you know. So you go back to what you know.
Yeah.
But that has nothing. That could have been an adoptive parent too. If
Well-
if the adoptive parent is beating the adoptive child, and the child doesn't have any place else to go, they'll go back to that parent, having nothing to do with biology.
But
Well,
Susan's, I mean, it certainly seems, whatever some of us may think here, the world seems to think biology matters a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you say
Well, biology, the reality of biology is that it gives us our heritage, our genes. We're not sure what else. It certainly doesn't give us our social environmental experience. It doesn't give us the experience that adoptive parents give to us. But it does, and of course people have been doing this for years, looking at research of what is inherited, what isn't. The truth is that there is some part of your being that comes out of your biological heritage.
That's a
Now,
fact, but I
to-
don't see how that confers any rights on anybody.
Well, I
Confers
don't.
responsibilities.
That's
What
where
I'm
the law comes in.
What I'm saying is that in this situation with this child and many other children, doesn't it make sense to think about something that's a more open arrangement to get these 4 adults to stop fighting and try and do something that will work for this child? For her now to know, as she will soon, as soon as she gets her cognition revved up when she's 8 or 9,
Soon as
she's
she
going to
gets to
know
first grade.
all about this. Now, does that mean because these 4 people are still fighting their battle, which I suspect they will in their minds and their hearts, that that child will never have any opportunity to know what the other side of the story was? I mean,
Probably.
she
Mr. G,
most
if the
people
legal
wouldn't want to know.
situation was clear, then there might be some prospect for the parents working out some kind of openness, although it doesn't
Oh,
seem
but they
that
can-
likely in this
But
situation.
that's what annoys me about the parents. I think they morally should rise themselves up above this and say, look what's happening to this child. Somehow we have to work out this terrible divorce or this awful hatred we have for one another, that they're not doing that, and that's
But-
not the court's
well,
fault.
not
You
everybody
know,
is equally loving. I mean, not
But
everybody.
Jessica's entitled to a positive imparting to her of her background and the facts and information, and she's entitled to get as much information as she possibly can, and in a way that is not harmful to her. And I'm afraid too that the bitterness in a situation that's allowed to go on this long might prevent that from happening. I'm not so sure that a cooperative arrangement would be feasible for people like this.
like this.
But at the very least, I think she's entitled to have as much knowledge of her background as possible, and that's where that's where you.
Well, I
think
think you
she's entitled to a lot more.
also must give some serious thought to the fact that Jessica is living in the house under incredible tension right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes you think she hasn't picked that up? There's something is wrong here. I don't know
Oh,
what
yeah.
it is.
Right.
And for 2.5 years old to be living like that, that's not that much.
But this just never should have happened. At 1 month, when there was an attempt to get the child back, and if it was legal, it just should have happened. That's what is so appalling about the situation with the law.
But her biological mother had signed a legal consent to place her for adoption.
Yeah, I mean, once you start undermining the legal adoption system, which to extent this recent decision seems to me does, you have a chilling effect on future adoptions, which, I mean, I'm an adoptive parent, and I consider adoptions a damn good thing, and really good for kids. And
Why don't we, I mean, what do we think should happen now? Because a lot of what concerns me is that, not just in Jessica's case, but do we see harm flowing from this decision? I was
Oh,
really
sure.
disturbed by what Paula said earlier, that she'd heard from a whole lot of men who said they thought they were biologic fathers, and maybe now they had some rights, and maybe they should come forward. I mean, my own sense is that although I think this case is appalling, I also think because it's so appalling, maybe there's some hope for using this case as a way to, I mean, I'd like to figure out how Jessica could stay with the divorce, but I'd also like to think how states could reform their laws so that they have a more effective way of terminating birth father rights, which I think we need here in Massachusetts just as much as Iowa needs it.
or you have birth fathers coming in and claiming kids. Why not have the innocent
Thwarted
father coming in and stopping a woman from having an abortion?
They've done that.
They've done that.
Well, it seems like a logical part of the same
Well,
legal
I think that-
Or from
river.
having a child. I mean, we were talking earlier about the frozen embryo
Right.
case, but I mean, I do think we're talking about a whole range of cases here where we're saying fathers, so-called, have rights, and in the frozen embryo case, it was the right to destroy the embryos. In this case, it's the right to have unprotected sex with various different women, not keep track of the pregnancy, reappear after the birth and say it's mine. But what do we want to do about it? I mean, my sense is one thing is we need to have a procedure shortly after the birth where you give notice to known fathers, unknown fathers, let them sign up in some putative father register if they really want to get noticed, and when they're running around having sexual relationships, if they think they want to be dad someday, let them sign up and give them whatever notice you can give them. But if they don't show up, I mean, here we had a hearing in Jessica's case where supposedly parental rights were terminated. My sense is the thing that should have happened early in this case is those rights got terminated effectively so that Jessica could move on to be adopted by the divorce.
This was not
but
an at-risk adoption?
we need, no,
Until
I
the
mean, rights were
termination went through.
officially
Termination went
terminated.
through.
And then we had the father come forward and say, no, I'm the father, and had the mother change her story. But I think what we need in Massachusetts and elsewhere is laws that make it clear that you can give effective notice a week, a month, whatever, after a birth, and free a child up for adoption.
You see, one of the things that happens, and what this really does, and I want to back up to 27 years ago when I first went to graduate school. Ethel Walsh, who taught casework, said to us, the most chilling thing an adoptive parent thinks about is someday somebody's going to come and knock on their door and say, I want my baby. And this case is playing it right out.
It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. I have adoptive couples calling me absolutely frightened to death because they've heard from men claiming to be birth fathers
Right.
who have a vague notion that there's something that they're now missing because they've all read the headlines.
Right.
and they're coming forward, and these are cases where adoptions have been finalized for years, and I can tell them until I'm blue in the face that you have a finalized adoption, you have a proper procedure that's been followed in this state or elsewhere, and all parental rights have been properly terminated.
But you still have a terrified, anxious mother.
Absolutely.
Well, what worries
And
me
you
more
still
is
have some guy saying, hey, but I'm the biological father. It was my sperm. I got my rights, and I'm going to go and get
Yeah,
that
but
kid.
I'll
See,
tell
my
you,
sense
they're
is
not-
that many fathers
they're
are
not
gonna
all
come
that
forward.
blue
The
collar,
real
though.
problem is
I'm
the
not saying- I'm
people who
just-
might adopt aren't going to adopt.
No, I wasn't
because
saying
here's
blue
another
collar.
reason to worry about adoption. That I mean, what I worry about is we already have so many barriers to adoption, which mean that kids sit who need homes and aren't getting them. And this seems to me yet another barrier to adoption, that people now, on top of everything else, on top of being screened in a ridiculous way, on top of 6 other things, now we have to worry that if I do adopt, I have to worry about the
Somebody
unknown
knocking
for
on my
an
door.
innocent father. So it means more people are going to hesitate, more people are going to spend more years in infertility treatment, and more kids don't get homes ever.
And more kids are in foster care.
Right.
That's right.
And that's the ultimate crime as far as I'm concerned. Because they shouldn't be there.
Well,
You know,
this
to
is
be
a
there
pretty
this long,
grim
is what I should say.
scenario.
That's right.
It is. I don't know what we do about it, because I see a reaction, and I think an overreaction now, where we have cases where there are, for example, 2 valid surrenders, they're called, or consents to place for adoption, and we go toward finalization, and the court is justifiably concerned that they don't have the real father's signature on that piece of paper, that it's someone else who signed it, which is in fact what happened in the Schmidt case. And until we DNA test every possible candidate, there's no way of finally assuring the court that it has a true consent.
Well, then there has to be a new precedent set.
Well, I think that in fact the law here and elsewhere, on its face, says that there's got to be some affirmative act beyond the biological connection for a father, an unmarried father, to have rights.
What does that mean, an affirmative act?
Well, signing a paternal responsibility register, providing support during the pregnancy to the mother, providing support after the birth.
There is a
But in-
draft Uniform Adoption Act now, and it has some tentative provisions. But I mean, I think states that want to clean up their act and not have the kind of situation that Iowa had can do it. There are people out there who have drafted language that would demand that the father who claims he's the innocent thwarted father come forward early and, as you say, show some interest in and ability to parent. And then you have a decision, and then hopefully you have a decision that's clear enough under the law that the court early in the game is both going to issue a decision on the merits, but also, I mean, what happened here is because of the uncertainty of the law, Jessica stayed with the DeBoers, and there could be this fight. I think if the law had been very clear as a matter of legislation, then there would have been a good chance she'd have been placed one place or the other
It was settled
and have
earlier.
stayed there.
It would have been settled 2 years ago, had they done it right. And they didn't do it. Well, they couldn't do it right.
But
because
they
of the law,
allowed
yeah.
is the legislature,
Yeah.
and my sense is partly it would be good for Massachusetts legislators to start thinking about this.
But what do
think
we
that's
do
right, but
about
if you
the children? What do we do about an advocate for the children? I mean, you
Well,
can have,
I
we
think that's the
can
most
try to
important
harness
thing.
the birth fathers. There are many women of all social backgrounds who have lied about the identity of the birth father for a million reasons, whether it was parental pressure,
Right.
their religion, whatever else. And it is true that there is a movement of birth fathers who came forth before this case. We sort of see it nationally because the American Adoption Congress is an umbrella for so many groups that it sort of comes across the ticker tape every day. And you see there is a big following. It has to do with men's rights. It has to do with, I believe, in some sense, a kind of backlash on feminism. I think it's all sort of brewing in the same pot. And there are very strong leaders of that group. They don't happen to be in Massachusetts, and we don't necessarily see them all the time. But they feel very strongly about having been deceived or tricked Men who are coming forward who say, I wasn't told and I would have wanted to be told, all this
but
great...
my
Well,
sense
that's-
is that children's advocates have to get into
Yeah.
the legislature.
I mean, you're talking
and what
about
they have to
men's-
do in the legislature is get some laws that say, we will put out notice, newspaper notice, the best notice we can, and we're going to then terminate those
Yeah,
fathers.
there's men's
innocent
rights,
or
women's
not.
rights, but the
I don't
kids'
think they
rights
have
should
a
be
constitutional
precedent.
right
We-
to come forward, 2.5 years later.
But that
and
isn't
ask
going to
for the
just,
child.
that isn't going to, that's a certain situation. Kids often need somebody when there's no problem about the
Well,
father coming.
I think the kids in foster care need
Well-
not just lawyers, but rights. I mean, partly, again, I think we focus on Jessica, and she's being yanked around after 2 years, but these kids who sit in foster care, nobody's saying, what about the fact that they're sitting there for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and
people wanting to
then if
adopt
they're
them,
lucky,
yeah.
might get adopted.
That's
But, I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
we need some
Or
laws
kids that
that
get
deal
yanked
with
out
that
of
situation.
foster homes where they've been 4, 5, 8 years
Right.
and where they
Yeah.
could continue. But we just had a case in Massachusetts.
That's several.
You're right. They
case.
got a lot of publicity.
Yeah.
That kid has been with
Yeah.
foster parents for years and years and gets yanked out.
Well, one of them was this abuse case, this
Sure.
Andy
Yeah,
case that
kid-
was
yeah.
in a happy foster home. Another child, 2.5, 3 years old, taken from the happy foster home to be handed back to the
Abusive.
parents who
Yeah.
had
Got their
plunged
act
his
together.
face
Yeah.
into a boiling pan of water because there was, quote, no present evidence
Yeah.
of unfitness. I mean, my sense is we need to revise laws to provide more effective ways of terminating when we think that parents aren't fit, and terminating properly. I don't see why Andy wasn't freed up at the moment he was taken from his birth parents after that horrendous abuse and able to be adopted at 8
Well,
months instead of
Yeah.
held till 2
Yeah,
and a
I
half
think
Even
whatever
so.
rights you have as a biologic or an adoptive parent, you can forfeit them.
And but the courts are reluctant to do that. The courts are reluctant to admit that parents can't parent.
But
Yeah,
that's
get
part
back
of why
to
the
that, too.
legislators have to do something
And they don't
about
want to
it.
do that.
But
Judges
here we
don't want
have
to do
this
that.
new law in Massachusetts that attempts to define what fitness is in 13 subcategories,
Yeah.
and or what unfitness is anyway. And it seems to me bends over backwards really to allow the biological preference to continue in some respects. It has to pretty clearly be abandonment for a long period of time, or failure to accept services that are offered, or failure to properly take advantage of services that are offered.